I never imagined I'd be the kind of father whose own son would drive away and leave him standing at an airport with nothing but the clothes on his back. But that's exactly where. I was 65 years old, in the middle of the departure hall at a busy international airport just outside Toronto, watching my son's taillights disappear into traffic along with my wallet, my phone, my keys, and I thought at the time, whatever love he had left for me. It all started that morning with what I thought was a sweet surprise. My son, Mark, called my small basement apartment in Etobicoke. His voice sounded lighter than usual, almost like the kid I remembered from years ago. "Dad, I've been thinking about you. I feel terrible I missed your birthday, so I booked us a weekend trip to Vancouver. Just you and me, like when I was little. I'll pick you up in an hour, okay?" I should have been suspicious. We hadn't taken a trip together since he was 12. Before his mother died, before university, before the fancy job, before he started introducing me by my first name instead of as his dad, but I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe turning 42 had made him nostalgic. That maybe he realized you don't get an unlimited number of weekends with your old man. So I packed my old duffel, the same one I'd carried to construction sites for 30 years, with 2 shirts, a spare pair of jeans, and the good jacket my wife bought me before she passed. I grabbed my worn little backpack where I kept my wallet, phone, and a couple $100, just in case. When Mark pulled up, he barely looked at me. No hug, no joke, just a distracted, "Hey, Dad, throw your stuff in the trunk, we're running late." While his eyes stayed glued to his phone on the drive, I tried small talk. "How's work going?" "Fine. How's Emma?" "And the kiddo?" "They're good." He never asked about me. Not once. I told myself he was stressed. He ran some kind of tech consulting firm downtown. I didn't understand half of what he did, but I knew it kept him busy. Too busy for his old man most days. We pulled up to the departure curb. Cars everywhere, horns, rolling suitcases. Announcements echoing from the speakers. Mark threw the car in park and popped the trunk. "Just grab your duffel, Dad. I'll go park and meet you at the check-in desk." Air Canada to Vancouver. Flight at 2 o'clock. Before I could even close the trunk, he was already merging back into traffic. I figured he was trying to beat the rush to the parking garage. I hoisted my duffel over my shoulder and headed inside, feeling a little thrill. A trip with my son? Maybe things were finally turning around. I stood near the Air Canada check-in desks, watching other families gather, laughing, bickering, taking photos. An older couple in matching jackets. A father lifting his granddaughter onto the conveyor belt and making her giggle. 20 minutes passed, then 40. I kept checking the automatic doors, expecting to see Mark walking in, waving me over, maybe apologizing for taking so long. Eventually, one of the airline agents asked, "Sir, do you need any help?" "I'm just waiting for my son," I said. "He's parking the car." I reached instinctively for my pocket to grab my phone and call him. My fingers closed on fabric. No phone. I checked my other pockets. No wallet. No keys. No backpack strap against my shoulder. And then I remembered Mark had told me to throw both my bags in the trunk. The duffel and the backpack. Less to carry. "Dad," he'd said, "everything I owned that mattered was in that backpack. My ID, my bank cards, my emergency cash, my health card, my phone, my house keys. My throat went dry. A dull, familiar pressure started in my chest, the kind I used to get hauling bricks in July heat. I tried to push it down. Maybe he'd just forgotten. Maybe he'd had to move the car. Maybe an hour passed. No text, no calls, no son. The truth settled in slowly. Like concrete hardening, Mark wasn't coming back. He had dropped me at the curb, driven off with everything, and left me standing there like an abandoned suitcase. An airport security officer eventually approached me, a young guy. Probably the same age Mark was when he graduated. "Sir, you've been standing here a while. Everything okay?" I tried to explain, but how do you tell a stranger your own son has just deserted you? The words felt ridiculous in my mouth. My son. He had all my things in the car. He said he'd park, and he never came back. Do you have any ID on you? A boarding pass? A phone? I shook my head. He was kind but firm. Without a ticket, ID, or a reason to be beyond security, I couldn't just stand inside forever. He walked me out to the passenger pickup area and pointed to a row of benches. At least sit down and think about who you can call, he said. There's a payphone over there, if you remember any numbers. I wanted to laugh. The last phone number I had memorized was my parents' landline, and they'd been dead for 20 years. I sat down on the bench. The air was cool. That early autumn kind of cool where the sun is still warm, but winter's waiting around the corner. People float around me with purpose. Hugs, suitcases, car doors slamming. Life going on. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a man who'd worked hard and raised a family. I felt disposable, like an old tool that had done its job and could now be tossed aside. I don't know how long I sat there, watching other people's reunions and goodbyes. 15 minutes. Maybe 40. Time got blurry, excuse me. The voice was rough but steady, worn down like stone in a river. I looked up. An older man, at least 10 years older than me, stood in front of the bench. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored coat over a suit that probably cost more than my truck. His white hair was combed back from a lined, sharp face. He leaned lightly on a cane with a silver handle. I couldn't help but notice. He said, "You've been sitting here quite a while. Are you all right?" The automatic lie came out first. I'm fine. Then, unexpectedly even to myself, I added, "Actually, no, I'm not." He nodded like that made more sense. "May I sit?" I slid over. He lowered himself onto the bench with the careful movements of someone who used to move easily and now thinks about every step, waiting for someone. He asked, "My son," I said. "But he's not coming back." The man watched a family loading luggage into a minivan for a moment. "And you have no way to get home," he said quietly. "No wallet. No phone." He took everything. I let out a short, humorless laugh. I must sound pathetic. An old fool who trusted the wrong person. Not pathetic. Just honest. That's rarer than most people realize. He glanced at me sideways. "How far is home?" "Etobicoke," I said. 20, maybe 25 kilometers. I could walk it in a few hours. 30 years ago. I gestured at my knees, which had more miles on them than I liked to admit. He was silent for a long time. Planes roared overhead. Suitcases rattled past. Then he turned fully toward me. "I'm going to make you a strange offer," he said. "You're completely free to refuse. But I think we might be able to help each other." My guard went up. "I'm not looking for charity." He smiled faintly. "This isn't charity. It's a transaction. Business, if you like." He extended his hand. "My name is Henry Zhao. I'm waiting for my driver to pick me up. He should be here in a few minutes to take me home." "Good for you, Mr. Zhao," I said, more bitterly than I intended. "I'd like to hire you." He said calmly, "That shut me up. Hire me." "To do what?" "To pretend," he said, "for a few hours to be my son." I stared at him. "That's a cruel joke, old man." His expression didn't change. "I had one son," Henry said. "He died 15 years ago?" "Since then, every relative I've never heard of and every opportunist with a fake story has tried to claim a piece of my fortune. I'm tired of it. Tired of not knowing who cares about me as a person and who just wants what I'm leaving behind." "And you want me to pretend to be your dead son?" I asked. "That's insane." "I don't want you to be him," Henry said. "I want you to be a son. For one evening. I have a house full of staff and a layer who are all very interested in my will. I'd like to see how they react when I walk in with a man I introduce as the son they didn't know about. And in return?" I asked slowly. "In return," he said, "I'll have my driver take you home afterward. I'll replace your phone. I'll see that you have enough cash to replace what your son stole, and then some. Say $5,000. Cash. 5,000? For someone like Henry, that was probably pocket change. For me, on a small pension, it was months of breathing room. I watched his face. He wasn't joking. His eyes were clear. Sad, maybe, but clear. A black Mercedes rolled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the back door. "Mr. Zhao," he said. "The car is ready." Henry pushed himself to his feet, then looked down at me. "You can say no," he said quietly. "You can limp home on pride. Or you can spend a few hours playing a role and leave better off than you arrived. I won't ask you for anything inappropriate. Call me Dad a couple of times. Sit at my dinner table. Let me watch how people behave. That's all." Every sensible part of me screamed that this was crazy. Rich people games. Drama I didn't need, but then I pictured the long walk home with no money, no keys, no phone, and no son. What exactly would I have to say? I asked. "Very little," Henry said. "Answer to your own name. Be honest about your life. I'll handle the story." He extended his hand again. "What's your name, by the way?" "Frank," I said after a pause. "Frank Miller, Mr. Miller," he said. "Shall we?" I thought of my son driving away without looking back. I took Henry's hand. "Fine," I said. "You've got yourself a fake son?" The drive into Henry's neighborhood felt like entering a different country. I'd spent my life building houses, small ones, big ones, commercial buildings. I'd worked in every corner of the city. But I'd only ever seen this part from behind construction fences, 4-story stone mansions, tall trees, private security, driveways bigger than my entire apartment building. Henry's house was a sprawling brick estate on a quiet, tree-lined street where the leaves were just starting to turn red and gold. A wrought iron gate slid open as we approached. The car rolled into a circular driveway around a fountain. "Welcome home." "Son," Henry said softly, and for half a second. He almost sounded like he meant it. A woman in her 50s was waiting at the door when we stepped out. Perfect posture, neat bun, pressed uniform. "Housekeeper, I guess, She smiled at Henry and then froze when she saw me. "Mr. Zhao, you didn't tell me you had guests," she said. This is Frank," Henry said smoothly. "My son. He's come home?" Her eyes flickered between us. Shock, confusion, something like disappointment. "Your son?" she repeated. I know what you thought, Nora," Henry said gently. "Life is full of surprises. We'll be having dinner in the large dining room tonight. Please ask the chef to prepare something special." She pressed her lips together and nodded. "Yes, sir." As I followed Henry inside, I leaned closer. She didn't look thrilled to see me. "She was hoping her nephew would inherit the house?" Henry said dryly. "You've just ruined his day without even meeting him." The inside of the mansion was like walking into a magazine. Polished wood. Artwork everywhere. Shelves full of books that probably weren't from the bargain bin. A staircase that swept up like something out of a movie, but underneath all the elegance there was a heaviness. Quiet hallways. Empty chairs. Rooms that felt like they were waiting for someone who never came home. Henry led me into a sitting room, overlooking a manicured garden. "I wasn't entirely honest at the airport," he said. Settling into an armchair, I stayed standing. "That doesn't surprise me," I said. He gave a small smile. "This isn't just about testing my staff," he said. "Though that's part of it. I'm dying, Frank." The bluntness of it knocked the air out of my lungs. "Dying?" I repeated. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," he said matter-of-factly. 6 months if I'm lucky. Less if my doctor is being polite. I've had a long life. I've built companies. I've made more money than I ever needed. But I lost my wife 17 years ago and my son 2 years after that. Ever since, the only people who come through that front door are people who want something from me." He looked up at me. "You looked like a man who had nothing left to lose," he said quietly. "And I'm a man who has nothing left but time and regret." It seemed practical. "Practical?" I echoed. "To bring a stranger home and call him your son?" "I'm not asking you to be him," Henry said. "My son's name was Daniel. We had a terrible argument before he died. He wanted to be a musician. I wanted him in the family business. I said unforgivable things. He left. 3 years later, he wrapped his car around a pole after a show in Montreal. We never made peace." He took a breath. I don't get to fix that. But I can decide how I spend the time I have left. And I'd rather spend an evening with an honest stranger than another minute with a greedy relative pretending to care. I sank onto the couch opposite him. You really think I'm honest? I asked. Henry shrugged. You told me the truth about your son at the airport, he said. Most people would have made up a story to save face. That tells me more than any background check. He straightened his tie. Tonight, my lawyer and my housekeeper's nephew will join us for dinner. You don't need to lie about your life. Don't invent a fake childhood. I'll handle the gaps. You just be yourself. Let them assume what they want. And after that? I asked. After that, Henry said, if you still want to walk away, the driver will take you wherever you want to go. With a phone, keys, and your cash. He paused. And if you don't want to walk away, we can talk. I didn't know what that meant, but before I could ask, Nora appeared in the doorway. Mr. Zhao, your lawyer has arrived. And Thomas as well. Show them to the dining room, Henry said. We'll be right there. He pushed himself up from the chair and glanced back at me. Ready, Frank? Not even a little, I said. But let's get this over with. The dining room table could have seated a small wedding party. That night, it was set for 4. Henry took the head of the table. He gestured for me to sit at his right. A thin man with glasses and a briefcase, clearly the lawyer, sat across from me. Next to him, a younger man in his 30s with a perfect tan and an expensive watch scrolled on his phone. The younger man looked up. When he finally realized there was a stranger at the table. Who's this? He asked. Colin, Henry said calmly. This is Frank Miller. The lawyer frowned. Mr. Zhao, I don't understand. Frank is my son, Henry said. From a relationship before I met my wife? We've recently reconnected. Silence dropped over the room like a stone. The lawyer recovered first. Mr. Zhao, he said carefully, I've handled your estate for over a decade. You never mentioned another child. There are many things I've never mentioned, Henry said. Please sit. We're here to eat, not interrogate. Colin forced a smile. Well, this is unexpected, he said. Uncle Henry, you never told the family. I'm telling you now, Henry cut in. The rest of the meal was tense. The food was excellent. I barely tasted any of it. The lawyer, Mr. Graves, asked polite, too curious questions. Where had I grown up? Where was my mother from? What years had I supposedly been away? Henry kept stepping in, redirecting. It's a painful story, he'd say. We're still rebuilding trust. No need to drag up old wounds. Colin watched me like a hawk. His questions were sharper. So, Frank, what do you do? He asked. I'm retired, I said. Bricklayer. Spent 30 years on job sites. Built half the condos you see when you fly into this city. Construction, he said with a little smirk. How practical. He took a sip of wine. And you suddenly show up now, after all these years, just when Uncle Henry happens to be finalizing his will. Interesting timing. I met his eyes. I didn't show up, I said. I was sitting at the airport trying to figure out how to get home without a phone or a wallet. Your uncle did the showing up, Henry chuckled. Well said. Son, he murmured. Mr. Graves' pen paused over his notebook. The word son changed the temperature in the room by several degrees. When dinner ended, Mr. Graves pulled Henry aside, whispering urgently. Colin cornered me near the hallway. I don't know how you found him, he hissed, or what sob story you told. But my family has been at Henry's side for years. We've looked after this house, his appointments, everything. You think you can just walk in here and what? I asked quietly. Eat dinner? You're not family, he spat. Blood doesn't automatically make you family, I said. Sometimes a stranger in a suit at an airport is more of a father than your own son. He opened his mouth to say something ugly, but Henry appeared at my elbow. That will be all for tonight, Colin, Henry said. Thank you for coming. Colin's jaw clenched. This isn't over, he muttered, and stalked off. I expected Henry to send me home after that. Instead, he showed me a guest room the size of my entire apartment. Thick carpet, huge bed, A bathroom with marble counters and fluffy towels. He'd had someone lay out clean clothes for me, somehow exactly my size. Stay the night, he said. You can't get into your apartment without keys anyway. Tomorrow I'll have a locksmith meet you there. We'll get you a new phone, and I'll give you what I promised. I've already caused you enough trouble, I said. Your nephew's ready to declare war? Henry waved a hand. They were circling long before you arrived, he said. At least now the masks are off. He hesitated. Besides, he added, this house is too quiet. It's nice to hear someone else's footsteps in the hall. I should have insisted on going home. Instead, I nodded. Double quone night, I said. One night, he agreed. And Frank? Yeah? Thank you, he said, for playing along and for not asking for more than I offered. You'd be surprised how rare that is in my world. I slept deeper that night than I had in years. The next morning, over coffee in a sunlit kitchen big enough for a restaurant, Henry made me another offer. Stay a week, he said. I'll pay you properly this time. I nearly choked on my toast. A week? Doing what, exactly? Whatever I ask, he said. Nothing illegal. Nothing demeaning. I need help sorting some things out, papers, art, old files. And selfishly, I'd like someone around who talks to me like a person, not like a walking inheritance. He sipped his coffee. At the end of the week, I'll give you $20,000 on top of what I already promised. Cash, if you'd like. Enough to give you some real breathing room. I stared at him. Why me? Because you didn't come here for money, he said simply. You came because you had nowhere else to go. There is a difference. I thought about my empty apartment, my son's silent phone, the way I'd felt sitting on that airport bench, invisible and discarded. I thought about how alive Henry had seemed the night before, sparring with his lawyer and needling his nephew, watching everyone's reactions with sharp amusement. I thought about how many days of my retirement had blended into each other like gray paint. 1 week, I said slowly. But no more pretending I'm your long-lost child. I'm your friend. Or your handyman, whatever you want to call me, but not your son. Henry considered this, then nodded. Agreed, he said. No more lies about your identity. Just one old man and one slightly less old man trying not to drive each other crazy. That week felt like stepping into another life. During the days, I helped Henry sort through his past. We went through boxes of old documents, charity records, business contracts. We cataloged paintings. We cleaned out a closet full of souvenirs from trips he didn't remember taking in the afternoons. We sat in the garden and he told me stories, how he'd come to Canada as a teenager with nothing but a suitcase and a stubborn streak, how he'd worked 3 jobs while studying engineering, how he'd stumbled into mining investments and struck it rich. He told me about his wife, May, how she'd kept him grounded when money started changing everything, how she'd died of a stroke in the kitchen 12 years before. He told me about Daniel, the fights, the pride. The night Daniel left and the phone call he got 3 years later from a stranger's number. I spent my whole life controlling everything. Henry said one afternoon, watching sunlight move across the grass. Companies, deals, people, the only things I couldn't control were the 2 things that mattered most, and I ruined both of those with my own pride. I told him about my wife, Claire, about the diner where she'd worked when I was a young laborer coming in for cheap coffee, how she'd encouraged me to get my own contractor's license, how cancer took her before she hit 60. I told him about Mark, how smart he'd been, how excited we were when he got into university, how lost I'd felt when he started speaking a language of metrics deg, pitch decks, that I didn't understand. I embarrassed him once at his office, I admitted. Showed up in my work boots after a job, dust on my jacket. He introduced me to his partners by my first name, not as his dad, like I was just some old plumber who'd wandered in. And finally, I told Henry about the airport, about the trunk, the missing backpack, the hour of denial, and then the cold, hard realization. Henry listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said quietly, You and I have something in common. Frank, we both lost our sons. Mine to a car accident? Yours to shame. The words hurt. Mostly because they were true. On the fourth day, my temporary phone, the cheap one Henry had bought me at a mall kiosk, rang. Unknown number. Hello? I said, Dad? Mark's voice, small, hesitant. I felt my chest tighten. It's me, I said. Where are you? He blurted, I've been going crazy. I went back to the airport. I called your neighbors. Your phone's been off. Your place was empty. I thought, you thought what? I said, I'd vanished? That abandoning your old man at departures was just fine? There was a long, shaky breath on the other end. I know what I did, he said. I know it was horrible. Dad, I panicked. I saw your bag in the trunk, and instead of turning around, I kept driving. Every kilometer I told myself I'd call you, I'd go back. And every kilometer I didn't, I told myself you'd be okay, that I'd make up some story later. And then you weren't answering your phone, and he swallowed. I've been sick over it, Dad. Why? I asked quietly. Not, why are you sick? Why did you do it? There was a long pause. Because I was ashamed, he said finally. Not of you exactly, of how my life looks to other people. Emma's parents are fancy. They care about appearances. They were supposed to fly with us, and I imagined you in your old jacket telling stories about cement and scaffolding, and I heard them judging me in my head for not having a father who fits their world. He took a ragged breath. I know how awful that sounds. I hate myself for even saying it out loud. I stared at the row of bookshelves across Henry's study. So you decided instead to dump me like trash, I said. To take my phone and wallet and leave me standing on a curb? I didn't decide that, he said quickly. I didn't wake up planning it. I just made one cowardly choice and then another, and by the time I realized how far I'd gone, it felt too late to fix it. Every day that passed, it got harder to call. Harder to face you. Silence stretched between us. Where are you? He repeated. Let me come pick you up. Let me explain. Let me try to make this right. I'm staying with a friend, I said. A man who saw value in me that my own son didn't. Dad, that's not... Listen to me, I cut in. I'm safe. I'm fed. I have a roof over my head. I am fine without you. But what you did... That doesn't disappear just because you're guilty now. I need time, Mark. Time to figure out whether I want you back in my life at all. Please, he whispered. Please don't say that. I'll call you when I'm ready, I said. Don't call this number again. There was a beat of terrified silence. Dad and Mark? Yeah, your mother would be ashamed. And right now, so am I? I hung up. My hand shook as I set the phone down. Henry, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner pretending to read, closed his book. Too harsh? I asked. Honest? He said. Which is harder? He studied my face. How do you feel? Like someone ripped open an old wound, I said. But maybe it needed air. He nodded slowly. Regret is the heaviest thing a man can carry, he said. You just dropped some of that weight on his shoulders. What he does with it is up to him. On the sixth day, Henry's lawyer came back with a thick folder. We need to formalize everything, Henry told me. I've made some changes. I don't want your money, I said immediately. Henry, I stayed because you asked. Not to, he held up a hand. I know why you stayed, he said. That's precisely why I'm including you. We all gathered in Henry's study, me. Henry in his armchair, Nora hovering near the doorway, Mr. Graves at the desk, and Colin with his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. Mr. Graves cleared his throat. At Mr. Zhao's request, I've revised his will, he said. I'm obligated to read the main points aloud. He started with the foundation Henry was setting up in his son's name, scholarships, grants, funding for young musicians who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. Then he detailed provisions for staff. Nora gasped softly when she heard about her pension and the retirement fund Henry had set aside for her. Now, Mr. Graves said, flipping a page, as for the primary residence, this property and all its contents. Colin leaned forward. Will be transferred upon Mr. Zhao's death, the lawyer continued. to Mr. Frank Miller, on the condition that he not sell the property for a minimum of 5 years, that he reside in it for at least 6 months of each year, and that he make reasonable efforts to maintain it as a residence rather than a commercial asset. The room went dead silent. Absolutely not, I blurted. Henry, no. This is insane. Colin sprang to his feet. This is fraud. He shouted. You've known this guy for what, a week? And you're giving him the house? Are you out of your mind? I've had 3 independent doctors confirm I am very much in my mind, Henry said calmly. You're getting a sizable cash inheritance, Colin, more than enough to live comfortably if you don't blow it on cars and lawyers. Be grateful. This place is worth $15 million, Colin snarled. And you're handing it to some nobody from a construction site? I've been here for years. I've driven you to appointments. You've been waiting for me to die, Henry cut in flatly. Frank didn't even know my name when I met him. He expected nothing from me. That's the difference. Colin's lawyer started talking about undue influence, capacity, legal challenges. Henry listened, then dismissed them with a flick of his fingers. You're free to contest it, he said. It will be expensive. And you'll lose. But if that's how you want to spend your inheritance, be my guest. Then he turned to me. As for you, Frank, he said, you haven't said yes yet. Because I can't, I said helplessly. Henry, this will tear your family apart. People will say I took advantage of you. That I climbed into a rich man's car and walked out with a mansion. You climbed into a rich man's car with nothing, Henry said. You were willing to leave with just a cab ride and a cheap phone. That's why you're the only person I trust with this place. He took a breath, his hand shaking a little on the arm of his chair. This house, he said, has been a museum to my regrets for 15 years. I don't want it turned into another vacation home or scraped for a new build. I want it to be something good. Somewhere people can heal instead of just count my money. He looked at me, eyes sharp. I'm not giving you this house instead of my son, he said. I'm giving it to you because of him. Because I never got the second chance I wanted. Maybe you will. My eyes stung, and what do you want from me? I asked. 2 promises, he said. First, you won't sell it for at least 5 years. Live in it, learn its sounds. Fill it with your own memories instead of mine. Second, you keep a room ready. A room for somebody who needs a safe place to land. A stranger on a bench. A cousin, a neighbor. Anyone you see a bit of yourself in. Help at least one person a year the way I helped you, for as long as you can. I thought about the guest room upstairs. The warmth of the bed. The way it felt to wake up, for the first time in a long time, not dreading the day that I thought about the version of me who would have limped home from the airport that day and sat in a dim apartment alone with his anger. I thought about the version of Henry who would have died in this big, empty house with only lawyers and opportunists at his bedside. I promise. I said quietly. Mr. Graves had me sign some documents acknowledging I'd heard the terms. Colin stormed out, shouting that he'd see us all in court. Henry watched him go with sad eyes. Money reveals people, Henry said. That's its only useful purpose. The next evening, my temporary phone rang again. This time, I knew the number. Dad, Mark said as soon as I picked up. I heard about Mr. Shao. Of course he had. Lawyers talk. And my son lived in that world now. Did you hear I supposedly swindled a house from a dying man? I asked. I heard he left you his home, Mark said. And that people are angry. Dad, look. I know what people are saying. That you manipulated him. That you took advantage. But when I heard, my first thought wasn't that you conned anybody. What was your first thought then? I said, that he saw what I was too stupid to see, Mark said simply. That you're a good man. That you're worth trusting. That you show up for people. And that I've wasted years being embarrassed by the best parts of you. He inhaled shakily. I don't deserve another chance, he said. Not after what I did. But if there's any way, if you can ever forgive me, I want to try to be better. For you. For my son. My throat thickened. I'm having dinner here tomorrow, I said. 6 o'clock. I want you there. Bring Emma, bring my grandson. And Mark? Yeah? This time, don't leave anyone at the curb. He let out a wet laugh. I won't, he said. I swear. The dinner the next night was awkward as hell, but it was real. Emma was polite but clearly nervous, sitting straight in her chair, taking in the house. My grandson Noah was 4 and had 0 filters. Is this a castle? He asked Henry as soon as we walked in. Are you a king? Henry barked a laugh. Some days I used to think I was, he said. Now I'm just an old man in a big house. But you can pretend it's a castle if you like. We ate roast chicken and potatoes. Noah dropped half his peas on the floor. Emma apologized 3 times. Henry waved it away. At one point during dessert, Mark stood up, glass in hand, hands shaking slightly. I need to say something, he said. You don't have to, I said quietly. I do, he insisted. For me. He swallowed. Dad, Mr. Zhao, he began. I've spent the last few weeks thinking about who I've turned into. About the man who left his own father at an airport because he was afraid of what other people would think. That's not the man my wife married. That's not the father my son deserves. And it's sure as hell not the son my parents raised. He looked at me, eyes wet. I'm so sorry, Dad, he said. I don't expect you to ever forget what I did. I barely can. But I want to earn back whatever I can. One visit at a time. One phone call at a time. One Sunday dinner at a time. If you'll let me. The room was quiet. Henry was watching me, not Mark. I took a long breath. I can't pretend it didn't happen, I said. But I also don't want to be 80 years old, wishing I'd picked up the phone. So we try slowly. You show up. You don't run away when things are uncomfortable. You teach that little boy there that a man doesn't abandon his family when it's inconvenient. Mark nodded hard. I can do that, he whispered. And we talk about your mother sometimes, I added. She's not a taboo. She's part of this family. Tears spilled down his cheeks. I'd like that, he said. It wasn't a perfect fix. There's no perfect fix. But it was a start. Henry smiled at me over his wine glass. Second chances, he said. Very on brand for this house. Henry died 6 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep, in the same bedroom he'd shared with his wife decades before. I was there that evening. So was Nora, so was Mark. We'd all taken turns sitting with him that last week, listening to the same stories over and over, laughing at the same punchlines. He slipped away with people who actually cared about him in the room. Not a lawyer, not a relative waiting for numbers on a will. The legal fight that followed was long and ugly, just like Henry predicted. Colin contested everything. Accused me of all kinds of things I'd never done. There were hearings, depositions, medical reports about Henry's mental state. It took 1.5 years. In the end, the court upheld Henry's wishes. The foundation launched. Nora retired to a little house up north with more in her bank account than she'd ever dreamed. Colin, from what I heard, burned through his inheritance trying to get more and ended up with less. And me? I moved into the big brick house of a man I'd known for 7 days. The house felt too big at first. Too quiet. I kept expecting Henry to call me from another room, ask where he'd left his glasses, complain about his medication, but slowly, my life stretched to fit the space. Mark and Emma started coming every Sunday. Noah turned my garden into his private jungle. We planted a tree for Henry and one for my wife. Sometimes Noah talks to them like they're listening. I kept my other promise too. In the 3 years since Henry died, 7 people have slept in the guest room. A co-worker of Mark's whose marriage fell apart overnight. A neighbor whose house burned down. A distant cousin I barely knew who showed up with a suitcase and nowhere to go. A young violinist from the West Coast, one of the first scholarship recipients from Henry's foundation, who came to play a concert in the city and needed a place to stay. Some stayed a week. Some stayed a month. Some left a note on the knitstand and a plant on the kitchen counter before they moved on. Every time someone new arrives. I think of the man on the bench at the airport who decided a stranger was worth saving. Sometimes I still go back to that airport. I stand near the same bench where I once sat counting my failures. I watch people rush by with luggage and coffee and tear-stained cheeks. And I think about how the worst day of my life turned out to be a doorway to a friendship I never expected, to a home I never asked for, to a second chance with my son, to a purpose in my old age beyond just waiting around. On the shelf in Henry's old study. Now, my study, there are two framed photographs. One is of Henry, younger and strong, standing next to his wife and their son, Daniel. In front of this very house, the other is of me, Mark and Noah on the front steps, taken last Christmas by Emma, with snow on the railing and Noah's mittened hands holding mine. Sometimes, when the house is quiet at night, I talk to both pictures. I tell Henry how the house is holding up, how the garden looks, how the foundation is doing. I tell him about the people who've slept in the guest room and how they left a little lighter than they arrived. I tell Daniel that somewhere out there, musicians are playing on stages because his father changed his will. I tell my wife that our son is trying, that I'm trying too, and I tell myself that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, family is the old man who sits down next to you on a bench when the rest of the world walks past. Sometimes, it's the stranger who shakes your hand and says, "Come home with me," when you don't think you have a home left. And sometimes, it's the son who made the worst mistake of his life and decides, one small action at a time, to be better. The day Henry offered me that ride, I thought I'd lost everything. Turns out, it was the day I started to get it all back.